Welcome everyone to Gratitude for Sale, a show where we explore the human experience and discuss testimonies on how gratitude unlocks abundance in all of our lives. I'm your host, Olukoya Davis, and today I'm lucky enough to have with me a friend for over 14 years. She's an accomplished actress with film credits like The Vanished on Netflix, a host of television shows, one of them being Two Broke Girls, which was one of my favorites from back in the day. She's an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and most importantly, the founder of Mourning Glory, a 501c3 that provides group support for people dealing with complex grief relief with a special focus in suicide loss survivorship. She's a true warrior and one of the most magnetic human beings I've ever come across in my life. With all that being said, welcome Aleksei Archer.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So before we jump into this conversation, because we have a lot to talk about today, I want to first kind of elevate the room and do a few positive news headlines that really kind of spoke to my soul and I felt like should be out there into the world. The first one being that a Nigerian chef made history with winning a Michelin star restaurant for her London restaurant called Chishuru. Now what's interesting about this is that she's the first UK black female chef to win a Michelin star.
Wow.
And more unbelievable is that she's the second black female to win a Michelin star in the world, which, again, I had to triple fact check that one. So I felt like that was a positive thing to bring up. Obviously, you're a strong black woman, come from Caribbean roots. And so you have any thoughts around that?
I'm pretty shocked that there's only been 2 black women.
Right. Yeah, no, I think it's kudos to her, right? But also Michelin, the governing body. I think,
that's probably where the problem is.
We can get a little bit better there. So the second highlight I want to bring up is there's a new online tool called the Path to Scale Dashboard. It's the first of its kind, which attracts funding to indigenous, local, and Afro-descendant communities. Which is a huge kind of development. As you all know, just within the world, there's always lacks of funding for NGOs and them trying to generate awareness to support their causes. So what this online tool does is it provides publicly accessible dashboard to help donors and NGO and rights holders identify critical funding gaps and opportunities in global efforts to secure community rights.
That's incredible.
It is. It's already highlighted roughly about several trends, including disbursements globally having averaged about $517 million a year between 2020 and 2023. So I think that, I wanted to bring this up, obviously, because I'm big into social impact and fundraising. And so we want to make sure that a tool like this is spread. I'll definitely, at the end of the episode, post it online, a link to it, so folks can go and jump in and tap in to see that information. So this is National Mental Health Awareness Month, and that's something that's wildly important to me. Over the last year, I would say I've evolved into doing a lot of self-work, doing meditation, doing therapy, and so I think it's really fitting to be able to have a conversation with you in May around this, because I know that's something that's super important to you in your life's work. But before we jump into all of it, I always ask this question, who is Aleksei Archer?
Who is Aleksei Archer? I love that. I am a biracial woman who was born in New York City in Manhattan to immigrant parents. My father was born in Ireland and raised in England, and my mother was born in Trinidad. And they met at a house party in Manhattan and fell in love. And then I'm an actor, as you mentioned, comedian, writer, producer, and philanthropist, which means I have way too many jobs, which is very Caribbean of me.
I was going to say, and live in color, right?
Exactly. But I think, fundamentally, I have what can be presented as a bit of a tough exterior, but on the inside, I'm a deeply vulnerable and generous person who really wants to make the world a better place before I'm out skis. So
I feel that. Before you out skis.
yeah, none of us are getting out of this alive.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that, Mom and Dad. I love it. I think we've known each other for a while now, and I think what's interesting is that you can know someone, but you don't sit and take the time to kind of ask them some of the deeper questions that really, I think, contribute to a person's journey and who they end up becoming. And so what was life like with a Caribbean mother and an English father in Manhattan in the 80s and 90s?
I mean, being and growing up biracial was, really confusing. The fact that I went to private school definitely made a big difference, but I was one of 2 brown girls in middle school, one of 1 in preschool. But being in Manhattan itself, culturally, was a very accepting and amazing place.
Right.
So, being a big city kid definitely, I think, has contributed to the person that I've become. I feel like socially you meet so many different people, and from the age of middle school, we were hopping on the subway and being out in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I just went to really small schools that were private schools, and so we had more privilege.
Right.
Yeah, which made for a smaller group of ethnic people.
I would imagine so, back then especially. And so you don't have any sisters, right? Or am I going crazy?
I wish I had a sister.
Yeah, you have 2 brothers?
I have 2 brothers.
Older, younger?
1 older, 1 younger.
Okay.
My older brother and I have the same mother. So when my parents met, he was, I think he was 5 years old. And so my older black brother was
non-biracial.
Not biracial.
Okay.
Yeah, he is Trinidadian on both sides. Was pretty much raised by my dad after the age of 5. And then my parents had another child after me together. So I have a biracial younger brother.
Gotcha. Now, did your mother grow up in New York, or when did she come to?
No, my mom had never used a telephone until she was 23. Wow. And so she didn't come to America until her early 20s. She was able to come to America because her father helped her to get out because she was an amazing designer and she could sew anything.
Okay.
And she came here and started designing for some pretty big designers like Ralph Lauren, among some others. And that's how she was able to support herself. And that was really a large part of her motivation to move to New York City, was to be a fashion designer. She ended up going to FITM.
Gotcha. And then did you end up going, kind of fast forwarding to you're 18, you graduate high school. Did you go to college, or did you come out to Los Angeles after that?
Yeah, I went to school for some time in Western Massachusetts just to kind of almost have a campus lifestyle that was really suburban and was really different for me coming from the city. I think I didn't even realize how wild it was to grow up in Manhattan once I all of a sudden wasn't there. I mean, I had traveled around the world even at that point in life, but really actually not living in New York and having it as my home base, I was okay, I'm definitely still a city kid.
Right.
So I studied there for some time, also a really intense liberal arts education. And I had done pre-college courses at Cambridge University, Parsons School of Design, School of Visual Arts. And then when I moved to Los Angeles, I came here as a visiting student at USC. And I fell in love with LA. I had always watched shows like 90210 and was obsessed with the Hoff from Baywatch.
The Hoff.
And even more so Pamela Anderson.
Yeah.
And so, once I came to LA, I was okay, I don't feel like I need to go back to the East Coast. I feel like I did New York. I and I was really ready for a day life experience because I feel like New York is such a nighttime city. I love that LA is more like beach and doing fun things during the day. And
Right.
there's so much opportunity here, like there is in New York.
And so coming out here to California, that was your first time away.
Exactly. That was the first time that I was like, okay, like I really am here alone. I knew one person when I moved here.
And did you fall into like just seeing like a friend group, or you just kind of floated essentially until you decided to kind of like hunker down with a group of friends?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely phased in and out of different friend groups, and it took a while. I think LA is a more difficult place to create a social life because everybody's in their cars.
Yeah.
And so it's a more tricky place to just like meet people, especially growing up in New York City. My older brother was like a big time party promoter and restaurateur, so I would meet a lot of people just by socializing that way. When I moved to LA, it took me a while to start really getting long-term friendships. But people like you, and I have some other friends that I've had like over a decade now,
Right.
who are like family.
And so that's, I feel like that's a pretty kind of textbook, or in terms of the journey, right? You kind of come here, you meet a few people, and you kind of just find your way for those first few years. You're pursuing acting as an actress. Were you involved in any other kind of work, or was that always the arts was the thing for you?
Yeah, arts was always a thing for me. Going to a liberal arts school, and getting that level of encouragement and support from my parents to be an artist, was, I think it was a blessing and a curse in some ways, because there's a vast amount of things that we could all focus on. And I feel like the arts is an amazing place. But thankfully, I also was really interested in psychology. And I felt like psychology was sort of, it's an arm to acting. Like I've always been really curious about the human condition. And so that was something that I studied for a while, and I sort of like it was a part of my education around acting.
Right.
And then it didn't really become active again in my life until much later, until I started to be sort of peripherally affected by mental disease.
Gotcha. Okay. And I bring all this about, I like to kind of, understand the journey, and how some journeys can feel very kind of manicured and very on a normal trajectory.
Yeah, not mine.
And some aren't, right? Some have these blips and moments of wild, crazy things that happen, but they don't necessarily impact how you're operating, and they may not surface some kind of levels of trauma that exist. And so I want to fast forward a little bit, because we became friends, would party, hang out. We were able to travel the world together.
Yeah, we definitely had some great times.
We'll save that for another show, another type of story. But something I wanted, that was 2015 or 2016? 2016. And to be frank, I remember like us having like one of the most amazing times, a group of people that we all traveled with. For the record, you were the only woman on a trip of 6 guys.
I got to be one of the boys.
You were one of the boys. And then we came back to LA, and everybody kind of just got back into the mode of work. And we probably didn't speak for a little bit. There was a period of time that we didn't speak. And I don't know if I called you one day or what happened, but you were on my mind, on my spirit, and I realized that I looked up in months, or maybe it could have even been a year that passed, and we didn't really connect. And that's when, I got the shock of, my life at the moment, which nothing compared to the shock that existed within you and your journey. And I want to be careful and honor, how we talk about this, but, can you share what transpired over that, 6-month, year-long period post our trip.
Yeah, actually, the timing of that, just in you reflecting on 2016. So we came back towards the end of the year.
Yep.
And I came back and immediately got into the CBS Diversity Sketch Comedy Showcase. So I was at CBS almost every single day. We were writing sketches to do this premiere showcase, which is like one of the best ones in the world. And throughout that time, I was really just focused on writing and becoming a part of this CBS family. And the show went up at the end of January, and it was really exciting. I almost immediately got onto another show, a CBS show that was called The Great Indoors, and that was in March. And then in April, my father took his life. And that time, it was like we were on this amazing trip, and then I was focused on comedy, and he and I were really close, and we were chatting back and forth. All of our last emails were about this show that I did, and I had a trip planned to go home to see him, but he took his life before I got home. And that following week, the show aired. And I was there sitting at home in my parents' apartment in New York City. They still live in the same, my mom still lives in the same apartment. And my number one cheerleader wasn't there, and that was hard because I have always and still look to make my father proud. So that was actually not too long after we had taken that trip. And then I stayed in New York for some time to support my mom. There's a lot of, it was a very, 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 very hectic time. And everybody's dealing with their own grief. Plus there's paperwork and things to figure out. It was definitely a huge derailment in my life as it was moving forward.
Right. And again, thank you for sharing. And I just being real. I don't know anyone in my life in any close proximity that has chosen that way to transition. So it was an eye-opening moment for me when we did speak, because I recall just being someone who I think lacked a lot of empathy for just the overall dynamic, right? I was someone who would have a hard time understanding why someone would choose to take their life. I didn't really think about how it impacted the people around them. I mean, to a certain degree I did, and I think that would, I probably focused slightly on that whenever I would think about suicide in terms of like when people, commit suicide. But I think my relationship with you and just observing your journey through that became really eye-opening for me. Can you just talk more about, were there times leading up to that you can reflect on to say, did I miss signs that was coming?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. First, I want to take the opportunity to acknowledge language and vocabulary. And I know we're living in this time where everybody's trying to sort of be sensitive about the words that we use. And sometimes, comedians, it can be tough and, it's almost could be a barrier to freedom of speech in some ways. But we try not to use commit when referring to a suicide, as opposed we like to say die by suicide or suicided. Okay. But back to your initial question, which was about signs. My father's suicide was a massive shock. And in retrospect, obviously, when you look back, there are things and signs that were definitely there. But suicide isn't really something that anybody really would necessarily consider that someone else would think about doing. It's not your first thought.
Right.
You know, nowadays, I'm seeing it so much more in television shows and in movies, and it's talked about quite a bit more, but there's still so much stigma. And probably part of the reason why you hadn't even really thought about that, and I hadn't either, because how often do you go to a party and hang out with someone like, oh yeah, I lost my dad to suicide. If you went to a party with me nowadays, you would probably know within seconds, and it's, you know, a large part of like all of my presence is in being the voice of suicide loss survivorship. But a large part of my motivation with doing that was once I became a part of the community, I realized that that I know of, there isn't really a spokesperson for this, because a lot of people, I mean, when I first lost my dad, there were people that didn't want to date me because they were like, you're too like fragile, or I don't necessarily want to be involved with someone who's gone through that kind of a loss. And there's stigmas that come up in a lot of different ways. Like, I have a million stories I could tell you. But, you know, the stigma is created and is fostered in large part by silence. And silence ultimately is deadly.
Right.
And that goes all the way around, even for people who are struggling.
Right.
When they're silent, like my father was, and he was going through what I now think may have been depression, but he's undiagnosed, so it's not really my place to say that. But part of what makes this grief complex is the question why. No one asks, why did so-and-so die by cancer? We accept that was their fate, right?
Right.
Versus a suicide loss, oftentimes we're going back and trying to look through clues to try to make a discovery so that we can feel more safe, because I think there is a very large percentage of people who have these kinds of thoughts. Mm-hmm. And I find often when someone is asking why, they're like, well, if I don't have anything like that, then, you know, maybe that makes me separate from that. But, you know, it is a really, 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 really big thing to overcome as a suicide loss survivor, is getting to the point where the why doesn't run your life.
Right. It's heavy. And so, and I'm sorry, I'm just having a hard time even talking through this, to be real, right? Who found him, and like, was it your mom, and like, how did she handle, and how have you been able to, you know, show up for her, or vice versa?
Yeah.
Was there a letter?
So I was always a daddy's girl, and my mom and I did have a lot of trouble. We had a tumultuous relationship. I mean, maybe tumultuous is a little too strong of a word, but we never were quite, like, we're now friends, but growing up there was always this sort of matriarchy that I never felt comfortable with, versus my dad and I really felt seen by him. So entering back into the family dynamic without my dad being there, I mean, I liken it to like a table with 3 legs. It's just like so unsteady.
Right.
Now I'm forgetting what the initial. Okay. In terms of like his, yeah. So what had happened was my father had an attempt, and my dad never lied, but he did this time, because he ended up going to the hospital for self-harming, but we thought that he was attacked, because that was the story that he told us. And the nurses at the hospital did ask my mom if she thought that he was suicidal. And my mom, knowing my father to be a very strong, independent, loyal guy that shows up all the time in every aspect of his life, would never do something like that. Mm-hmm. So he was released. And 3 weeks later, he did his final attempt. And he set it up. I guess he learned from his first experience. My dad was very well read, and so he purchased a book where he could figure out best practice for how he would pass peacefully, if you can so much say that, because obviously, the claim is that any person that takes their life is having some version of very intense mental unrest. So he left notes. My parents had 3 homes at that time. He left notes at the second property and went to the third property in the countryside, which was 2.5 hours in upstate New York. He took his life there, but by the time the notes were found at the second location, he had already passed. And what I will say about that experience, because now I've had hundreds, probably thousands of conversations with survivors, is that I am grateful that he made sure that nobody who loved him found him. He was found by EMTs, and that's because of the way that he set things up. This is a good example of finding gratitude in pure darkness. I'm sorry. I know this is...
No, it's a conversation that never, I think unless, it's something that's happened to you, you don't have the conversation.
No.
I mean
No, and that's what part of my life's mission is, to have what I like to refer to as the conversation. Yeah. Because every time we do this, we are making the world a better place. Even if no one else except for the people that are in this room hear this, we are starting to create a world where we can talk about our deepest, darkest struggles, because my dad didn't have the conversation.
Right.
He wasn't expressing himself. He wasn't going to therapy. He wasn't getting diagnosis. He wasn't interested in medication. He wasn't interested in trying, and this is not the case for every person who, this is just my dad specifically.
Right.
Him presenting to the world as being strong, which I feel like the word strength is overused, because strength sometimes could override vulnerability. And it's in vulnerability and in connection that we get the chance to really see what's inside of other people. I mean, how often are people like, hey, how are you doing? And you just say, good, because most people don't want to know the real answer. But maybe they do.
Maybe they're open to it.
Yeah.
Right? And that's why they're asking, or maybe we need to, really ask more questions, just be a little bit more intentional in our tone.
It's a very, 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 being intentional with our tone, making sure that we are kind to people, and then also, if you do suspect that somebody might be suicidal or having challenges with their mental health, asking them, are you suicidal? Like, that is one of the most groundbreaking things that we can do, is straight up ask. And I think we have a cultural idea that if you ask, then you're giving the person an idea. Let me tell you, if somebody's thinking about it, no one else is giving them that idea.
Yeah.
Creating an environment where they can express that, if that's what's on their heart, is a major, major, major step towards healing.
Right.
And creating community.
I mean, and it clearly sounds like, I mean, not just sounds like, it shows in this conversation that you have, done a lot of work to probably get to where you are now. It's last Friday was coming up on 7 years.
Last Friday, it was 7 years since my father took his life. It was April 26th. And I started Mourning Glory, my 501c3, 4 years ago. And the tent pole of Mourning Glory, it's spelled M-O-U-R-N, is group therapy. And this month is also 4 years since we started doing our groups.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I think that this anniversary is really, really, really significant because that means that I have been actively grieving for more than half of the time that my dad's been gone. And I'm proud of that.
Yeah.
Because if you don't do your grieving, grieving will do you.
Can you repeat that? Like for real.
If you don't do your grieving, grieving will do you. Yeah. Because what I have found is with people who have gone through maybe some complex grief or considered trauma survivors, there's so many different ways to do the work, too. I have found that community is hands down the fastest way to fast track a grieving pathway and the best way to heal. Because when you find other people who have gone through a similar experience who are willing to share their conversation, then all of a sudden you start to create these indelible bonds that are literally like creating new family members.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's the power of, human nature, is that we're social. We want to connect. And the more that we open ourselves up to doing so, it allows us to do it.
Right. That being said, I think it's a really big missed opportunity to not take the darkness, to not take our traumas, and to go right through them in order to create a brighter future. I mean, at this point, the community that I have, I couldn't even imagine life without them. These people are my brethren, they're my sisters,
right.
I have members of my group who are like dads to me too. And of course, I still have a huge void where Jeremy would be, but my cup runneth over with the love that I have discovered through the darkest pain that I've gone through.
Yeah, I mean, that's beautiful. It's again, I feel so uncomfortable, not even truly knowing how to respond to any of this, knowing, a testimony, knowing that we were going to talk about this subject, and me not realizing how uncomfortable I was going to be in having this conversation. Thank you for being so strong and brave, because I'm trying to pull from your level of strength to make this a conversation that doesn't seem even more awkward than I know that it already is for me, for anyone watching, right?
Yeah. And what I will say is you are so brave, because a lot of people could have easily been like, you know what, maybe I don't even want to have that kind of a conversation at all. And your willingness to allow me to bring my perspective, which is coming from, a very dark place, but it, at the end of the day, gratitude is what has saved me. gratitude and remembering love, right? Obviously, like the loss of love, right? That's
Right.
like, that's where we go to, like the loss of the person. Like, oh, he's not here anymore. Oh, my cheerleader's gone. Like,
Right.
I'm a daddy's girl. Now my identity, like, who am I without my father?
The ego,
Yeah,
all the things
yeah.
you're grabbing and attaching to, but that's, you have to surrender. We talked about Anthony and I from the episode 1, right? We talked about surrendering, and so that, I'm sure, becomes part of it.
Yeah, surrendering, absolutely. Acceptance was like one of the first things that I knew that I was gonna need. Like right when it happened, I was like, okay. I started to go to my toolbox because I've always been into like self-help and all of this stuff, right? And I've had gurus and mentors and shamans and like all of this stuff, right? And I was like, what am I gonna need to get through this? And I was like, I have to find a way to get to acceptance as quickly as possible. And I have waxed and waned on that journey. But when I really think about going to my first group meeting, which was at the Suicide Prevention Center, they had their location, I think, was relatively new on Olympic Boulevard, and it says Suicide Prevention Center in massive letters. And I was going through a really difficult time in my healing process, probably because I wasn't like actively trying to heal. Like I didn't really know what to do. And they connected me with their bereavement sector. And I didn't even know that I was bereaved,
Right.
But they were so helpful.
Yeah.
I couldn't bereave it. Just trying to lighten the mood a little here.
Right. And there's so many layers. There's
Yeah.
so many layers to that journey, right? To the journey that you're on, the journey that we all are on when we, experience certain types of traumas. And you having Mourning Glory and doing these group therapy sessions, and it's something that, like I said, I'd never heard of suicide,
Loss, survivorship. I had never heard of that either. I was like, I'm a survivor? I just thought this
Right.
whole time they were trying to vote me off the island.
But it makes total sense, though.
Yeah.
Like when you hear it, it's, oh yeah. I mean, that's what's needed. You think there's people around that deal with it, but
Where?
okay, yeah.
Yeah. And also, like, these groups, I mean, they don't have great marketing. And also, like, the Suicide Prevention Center, their main focus is suicide prevention, right?
Right.
So survivorship is kind of like under their larger umbrella, right?
Right.
So that's why I started Mourning Glory, because I was like, I want something that is just for the survivors, the people who are left behind to deal with this complex grief, because
Yeah.
it's specific. And so grieving is becoming a bigger part of our umbrella, because I feel that now that I've gone through this sort of like the darkest, worst experience, and they do say that losing someone close to you to suicide is one of the worst things you could ever experience as a human being. And,
Yeah. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No.
I can't imagine. I mean, my younger brother, he was killed when he was 17. I had a best friend who was killed. My mother just passed away last February, and I was actually on the phone with one of my best friends, his mother passed away last summer, 6 months after my mom passed. And we were just talking yesterday just about, when you lose a parent, a mom, dad, whomever, right? Anyone close to you, and how that pain doesn't go away, right? Like you learn how to just live life with it. My mother passed of cancer, his mother passed of cancer, but we can say fuck cancer, right? We can point to that. And so in all of this processing of emotions, there's an ability to kind of like place some kind of blame somewhere on an external factor. And so that's when I say just kind of like the layers that exist within dealing with suicide. I can't imagine like the depths of conversations and just mental processes that you have to explore to get to a place that is not ever over it, but just, again, of acceptance and knowing that you may have ups and downs where there's, these moments that it may hit you still a little bit harder.
Yeah, absolutely. It took me some time to, first of all, not self-blame for having not gone home sooner, of not being like assuming that my dad was suicidal. It's not a rational thought to have. And so I live my life now with no guilt associated with my father's suicide. And I don't blame my mother or anybody else who was around my dad. At the end of the day, my father was experiencing some kind of deep and intense mental unrest. I will never know the full details of what he was going through. But what I will say is that I know that every time I show up to a meeting, every time I have my guests, my clients, my patrons show up, we're all there ultimately because we loved someone so much. And fundamentally, that's why we're there, because we love that person. No one's showing up to a group meeting because they didn't care. They didn't get,
Right, they had mixed feelings.
No, they're there because they loved. And even if they are coming with mixed feelings, that's okay too, because it is complicated and we do go through these different trials and tribulations and trying to figure things out or get over the question why. But I think ultimately, I would like to see a world where survivors of suicide loss can live without shame, regret, and guilt. Because our person didn't want that for us.
Right.
They were on their own journey. And so that's what I would like to see for my community.
Yeah, and I was actually going to get to that, which is just kind of understanding, during these group sessions, are there things that, I'm curious to understand, are there certain exercises that you all do or mantras that you repeat that, help out and that you think are probably good for just universal practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So we start off every group meeting. I co-facilitate alongside a mental health professional. There is also a peer-to-peer option as well, where we just have survivors who are running groups. But for the most part, there's mental health professionals, sometimes even 2 or 3 at each group. So that's part of what has made our groups really special. And part of what has made the expansion plan more challenging, because getting all of those people together, it has its own challenges, but has also made it so special and has, I think, really elevated all of everybody's grieving pathway. But I was going somewhere with this.
We were talking about mantras or just practice exercises.
Right. So we start every group by saying, "Hi, my name is Aleksei Archer. I lost my father, Jeremy, to suicide April 26th, 2017. And everybody goes around and does that, including me, obviously.
Right.
And so the reason why we start every group by saying out loud that we lost that person to suicide is so that we ourselves can remember that we are working towards accepting that that is what happened.
Right.
And that it's specific. That's what happened, that's how it happened. And of course, everyone in the group, even when we all know each other really well and we all know who died when, all of us have each other's dates memorized and stuff like that. It's a good way to get into having the conversation, because it's almost like we're saying it to ourselves.
Right.
Then throughout group, I try to keep a pretty open flow. A lot of our groups take place over telehealth, so I'm able to sort of oversee who's going through what and can pull people into different conversations, because I'm able to,
Right.
read human beings, hopefully, right? But we always, and this is unique to Mourning Glory, we always end our groups with gratitudes. So we say something that we're grateful for, the reason why, and thank you 3 times, and feel as grateful as we can when we say thank you.
I love it.
And oftentimes people are grateful for other people's shares and what they've learned there today. And a lot of it is just like loving on each other.
Right.
And it's like by the end of the group, I would say that the mood, even if we, sometimes the mood is not heavy.
Right.
Sometimes the mood is.
Right.
But by the end, we find gratitude in each other and that we've found each other.
Right.
And that we know that we're there ultimately for love.
And that's, I love that you kind of wrap that in a bow, right? Because, as I open up the conversation around, how gratitude unlocks abundance in all of our lives, that's the thing, right? Is the abundance of love. Oftentimes, we're kind of searching for, we say these words, abundance, gratitude, like, what do these words mean, right? And I think we conjure up very kind of specific thoughts when we hear those words. And so sometimes it's really about the openness of what that word can be applied to, the word being abundance, and how gratitude unlocks it. And coming out of these sessions, they are leaving with an abundance of love.
Yes.
Through acknowledgement of gratitude.
Yeah. And, spoke about this in group yesterday. Sometimes I'll meet someone and their dad's like 85 years old. And I'm like, oh my God, I could have had decades and decades more of time like with my dad. But then I think, I did have him. And
Right.
I still do. I mean, I could literally hear him in my mind right now. It's, oh, Alex, here you are talking again about suicide. Will you just get over it already?
That was great.
Will you just stop? But I love you. I love you very much. And that's what he used to always say. Mm-hmm. And so I find gratitude that I had him even for as long as I did.
It's interesting that you say that because, when my mother passed last February.
Which my condolences. I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you. When I had to tell my son that she passed, I picked him up from school, sat him down. We went to grab like boba time. It's our little thing. And then I told him, I'm like, hey, son, Nana, she passed away. And he was processing, and a little tear came out. He got up, and I'm like, you want to give me a hug? So he gave me a hug. And the first thing I said to him was, I said, listen, here's what you got to remember. Daddy, my father passed away when I was 4. I said, Daddy got to spend 42 years with Nana. And I said, that's what we have to think about. That's what we have to focus on, is the time we had with them. I said, so I can't be sad. I can be sad, but I can quickly realize how grateful I am that I had 42 years because I only had 4 years with my father. So, go through the grieving and the process that you have to do, son, with this. I know we're going to miss Nana, but always focus on the time you had, because again, at that moment of potential darkness where we can dive deeper into sadness of the love that the physical manifestation of what we define as love, we have a world full of thoughts and memories that are positive around that person being here, and that's gratitude.
Absolutely. I think I had a sort of what I'll refer to as a come to Jesus into my suicide loss survivorship pathway, where I was like, man, I feel like I'm really focused on my father's suicide, and what about his life? What about the life that he lived? Like, am I celebrating that enough? Mm-hmm. And so I do also celebrations of life for him.
Love it.
I have birthday parties for him where I invite my survivor friends over and we have cake.
Why not? I love it.
And do community games. Because as much as I honor him, Mourning Glory is not to glorify him. Because his behavior, his final choice has created a lot of consequences. And for people out there who are thinking about hurting themselves, I want people to know, because especially as a child who has lost a parent to suicide, what it can do is teach us that suicide is an answer to a problem, but it's not. And there are schools of thought out there that suicide is 100% preventable. I would like to get on that page, but what I will say right now is that suicide can be preventable. And that the fallout of what happens to families is irrevocable. It really is. I mean, it has really torn my family apart in a way that will never be the same. I have somehow found the light by creating Mourning Glory, and I named it Mourning Glory because when we go through the mourning, we can find the glory and finding lightness in dark. But suicide is not an answer to a problem, and it never will be.
I love it. I love how serious you are about that position, and you're still allowed to love and be accepting of the choices that people make, because they're their choices. They're not ours. So all we can do is send out this message. And I want to just salute you. I mentioned that you're a warrior on the introduction of this conversation, and you know the levels of how you thrive, which is the word for it. I think I can't even articulate. You know,
I actually wanted to change. Okay, so suicide loss survivor was what we've called survivors now for that is the coined terminology. So once you start messing with those words, it can kind of complicate things, and then but I would like to change it to suicide loss thriver, because there's a connotation with survivor that I think is a little bit negative.
right?
But I haven't. I'd like to do that at some point, because because there are people who have lost someone close to them to suicide who haven't either had the opportunity or haven't made the choice to do the work, and I know that they're suffering, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There is community, and I encourage everyone. And even if it's not like a suicide loss, find your community.
Right.
Yeah.
Find the love. Find a vulnerable, safe space, healthy space.
Yeah. And to know like you're not alone.
Right.
You are not alone. No matter what you are going through, there are other people in the world who are going through something that is very similar.
Right. Right.
If not the same.
And that's so universal to all types of traumatic experiences. So, thank you so much, Aleksei, for sharing with us. We're coming up on the end of this conversation, and I just want, kind of like one or two last questions. One is, name something that a piece of advice you would tell, a younger Aleksei Archer. And the second question I would like you to answer is, what are you grateful for?
I will start with my goodness. What's a piece of advice to give my younger self? Probably to just find joy. To find joy in every moment that I have. I have trouble with that sometimes even today. I think I'm better at it now because I realize that this life is finite and that eventually I won't be able to be here having this life experience, and I feel so blessed and so lucky to have it. And I think gratitude is my way in. And that will segue me into the next thing, which is I'm so happy and grateful to have had this conversation with you. I'm so happy and grateful to have been friends with you for so long. And I am so happy and grateful that you had the bravery to have me come here and have this conversation, because there's a lot of other people that wouldn't. I'm so happy and grateful to have you in my life. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, appreciate everybody listening to this episode, and have a beautiful day. And thank you again, Aleksei Archer.
One last thing.
Yes.
Don't forget that even in the darkness of your mourning, your life is glorious.
Thank you. All right. That's it. It's a wrap.